Chapter 3 and verse 1. After these things did King Ahasuerus promote Haman the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, and advanced him and set his seat above all the princes that were with him. Now first of all, we know from Daniel chapter 6 that in verse 1 it says it pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 princes, which should be over the whole kingdom, and over these 3 presidents, of whom Daniel was the first, that the princes might give accounts unto them, and the king should have no damage. And it says in the last verse of Daniel chapter 6 that Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. This was the same time frame that Esther supposedly takes place, but we have a problem here because in Esther chapter 3, it says in verse 1 that Haman was promoted above all the princes that were with him. That would include Daniel if this would have taken place in this book of Esther. Now the king at this time was Darius the Mede, as we saw in Daniel chapter 6, yet no mention of Haman in the book of Daniel and no mention of Daniel in the book of Esther. But again, this book of Esther was meant to be included in the King James Bible to serve as a blueprint of the negative part of God's plan so that you could recognize the pattern even in recent history and on up to this day, the MO of the Kenites. Mordecai's report about the conspiracy to kill the king on the part of Bigthan and Teresh and the possible setup of Bigthan and Teresh will play a key role here. And let's analyze the events that led up to 1948 and see if we can figure out what Bigthan and Teresh are symbolic of. A key part of the Kenites' plan for global domination was the Communist Revolution, from which came the 2 communist parties, the Stalinists and the Trotskyites. And it's a documented fact that the neocons who came into power in the United States in 1980 are the Trotskyite wing of the communist system, and the Democratic Party was taken over in 1933 by the Stalinists through Bela Moskowitz. That same year, the Third Reich came into power, and it's as though the Kenites were going by the pattern we see here in the book of Esther, and there we have the answer, because the Third Reich happened after the Balfour Declaration, and the Rothschilds were involved in that, and the Third Reich itself was an alliance between the Zionists and the National Socialists, but they needed a Haman, a Fuhrer, and in all of this, there is no good guy, but only pawns on the grand chessboard, as they call it, the end result being a world government, as you can see in Daniel chapter 8, where Daniel was at Shushan and saw a vision, and it concerned a he-goat, that goat nation, the Kenite nation, not a geographic location, but the shadow government, and the great horn of the he-goat I believe to be the United Nations, a direct result of the Second World War and the skeletal structure of the political beast that will emerge at the woe of the 5th trumpet, which is when the he-goat becomes the leopard of Daniel chapter 7. Notice how solid the book of Daniel is compared to the book of Esther, which is very flimsy, historically and biblically, because it's not mentioned anywhere else in the Word of God, but Daniel is. Daniel's mentioned in Ezekiel, and he's also mentioned by Christ himself in Mark 13 and Matthew 24. So Esther chapter 3 verse 1, after these things did King Ahasuerus promote Haman the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, and advanced him and set his seat above all the princes that were with him. Again, Daniel was above all the princes, as you can document for yourself in Daniel chapter 6. And all the king's servants that were in the king's gate bowed and reverenced Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him, but Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence. Then the king's servants, which were in the king's gate, said unto Mordecai, which means little man or worshipper of Mars, Why transgressest thou the king's commandment? Now it came to pass, when they spake daily unto him, and he hearkened not unto them, that they told Haman to see whether Mordecai's matters would stand, for he had told them that he was a Jew. And when Haman saw that Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence, then was Haman full of wrath, and he thought scorn to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they have shown him the people of Mordecai. Wherefore Haman sought to destroy all the Jews that were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, even the people of Mordecai. Just because Mordecai wouldn't bow to Haman in reverence, he decides to exterminate an entire race of people. Does that make any sense whatsoever? I think not. But it does make sense as a game plan to garner the sympathy of the world to carry out the Zionist agenda. Again, the National Socialists and the Zionists formed an alliance, the end result being the formation of the State of Israel in 1948, which began this final generation, the generation of the fig tree, setting the stage for Satan to appear in Jerusalem at the sixth seal, the sixth trumpet, and the sixth vial. In the first month, that is the month Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast pur, that is the lot, before Haman from day to day and from month to month to the 12th month, that is the month Adar. Now here we have the origin of the word Purim, which means lots plural, and what does the word lot mean? It's from an unused root meaning to be rough, as stone, properly a pebble, i.e. a lot, small stones being used for that purpose. Those stones weren't smooth over a long period of time. That word count in Revelation 13:18 means to enumerate stones weren't smooth over a long period of time. The pebbles that came off of the larger rock, that is to say the false rock, the king of Tyrus, as he's called in Ezekiel chapter 28, the false Christ. And Haman said unto King Ahasuerus, there is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of thy kingdom, and their laws are diverse from all people, neither keep they the king's laws, therefore it is not for the king's profit to suffer them. Now King Ahasuerus would have known who the children of Judah were. Look at the book of Daniel. Daniel was from Judah. He didn't hide it. And look at the last verse of Daniel chapter 5. Right as Babylon falls, Darius the Median took the kingdom, being about 62 years old. And again, in the last verse of chapter 6, Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. In chapter 8, verse 2, we see that Daniel was at Shushan, the same geographic location Esther supposedly transpired. So why would Haman have to explain to the king who the children of Judah were? He didn't. This is a work of fiction. It is the blueprint of the method of operation of the Kenites. This idea of wiping out the entire race has made it to the point where at this very day, anything negative said about them, the Kenites that is to say, is met with contempt, and you can even go to prison in some countries for questioning the events of World War II. And here we have it in verse 9 of chapter 3, if it please the king, let it be written that they may be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver to the hands of those that have the charge of the business to bring it into the king's treasuries. And the king took his ring from his hand and gave it unto Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the Jews' enemy. And the king said unto Haman, the silver is given to thee, the people also, to do with them as it seemeth good to thee. This couldn't be more out of character for the king that was reigning in the supposed time frame of Esther, because in Daniel chapter 6, verse 26, King Darius made a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom men tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. Daniel was from the tribe of Judah. For he is the living God and steadfast forever, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall be even unto the end. But no mention of the God of heaven anywhere in the book of Esther. Only in acrostics, letting you know that God intended that this book be included in the canon. Then were the king's scribes called. I wonder who these scribes were. I realize it's a fictitious story, but you see the blueprint here. The scribes have to be involved. You know from 1 Chronicles 2:55 to watch out for scribes. Not that all scribes are Kenites, but when they're participating in something like this, that's when the alarm bells of discernment should be ringing in your head. Then were the king's scribes called on the 13th day of the first month, and there was written according to all that Haman had commanded unto the king's lieutenants and to the governors that were over every province, and to the rulers of every people of every province according to the writing thereof, and to every people after their language in the name of King Ahasuerus was it written, and sealed with the king's ring. But no historical documents have surfaced to this day of any such writing. You would think at least one of the 127 provinces would have kept the record for historical reasons. It called for the extermination of the entire Jewish race, supposedly, if it really happened, which, as we can see from the book of Daniel and the rest of the Bible, where Esther isn't mentioned, Haman isn't mentioned, and neither is this decree. But don't think it's not supposed to be in the Bible, because again, it is supposed to be in the Bible, and we're learning why that is now. And the letters were sent by posts into all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and to cause to perish all Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in one day, even upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month Adar, and to take the spoil of them for a prey. The copy of the writing for a commandment to be given in every province was published unto all people, that they should be ready against that day. The post went out, being hastened by the king's commandment, and the decree was given in Shushan the palace. You'll see Shushan mentioned in Daniel chapter 8, as well as the he-goat, symbolic of that goat nation, the shadow government of the Kenites that carry out the negative part of God's plan through the 4 hidden dynasties. And the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city Shushan was perplexed. Confused, that is to say, because of the 4 hidden dynasties of the Kenites. And here you have the outline of the plan going back to chapter 2, Bigthan and Thoresh, the 2 wings of the Communist Party that have infiltrated the 2 political parties of the United States. And look around, are people entangled in that? That's what that word perplex means if you look it up in your Strong's Concordance. Entangled, they're entangled within it, for it is a snare of the hidden dynasty of politics. Going back to the Bolshevik Revolution, the Stalinists and the Trotskyites, the Democrats and the Republicans completely infiltrated, obviously, and the Communist Revolution itself, which brought about the birth of the Soviet Union, was financed by the Kenites from Wall Street. There's your hidden dynasty of economics. Leading up to the events of the Second World War, which brought about the United Nations and the State of Israel being recognized by Truman. And who else recognized the State of Israel in 1948? The Soviet Union. And it was the United States and the Soviet Union primarily that formed the United Nations, the Great Horn of the He-Goat. 1948 being the beginning of this final generation, the generation of the fig tree that will end upon the return of the true Christ. But just before that, 5 months before that, at the woe of the 5th trumpet, after the great horn of the he-goat is broken, so to speak, and you can read of this in Daniel chapter 8, verse 8, therefore the he-goat waxed very great, the shadow government of the Kenites, the Illuminati, if you choose to call them by that name, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken, the United Nations was broken, the power of the United Nations, that is to say, and for it came up 4 notable ones toward the 4 winds of heaven. This is the lion, the bear, the leopard, which is the Kenites and their 4 hidden dynasties. They go from being the he-goat to the leopard at the woe of the 5th trumpet, and Daniel's 4th beast, which is the supernatural, meaning Satan and his angels will be cast from heaven unto the earth at the woe of the 5th trumpet, and that's when the one world political system emerges. It will then be wounded to death, as it's written in Revelation 13, and then in Daniel chapter 8, verse 9, it says, and out of one of them, out of the 4th beast, to be more specific, came forth a little horn. This is Satan's role of Antichrist, Satan appearing in Jerusalem at the 6th seal, the 6th trumpet, and the 6th vial, and then immediately after that 5-month-long hour of temptation, the true Christ returns at the 7th trumpet, the 7th vial, and within the time frame of the 7th seal, immediately after that half hour that you can read of in Revelation chapter 8, verse 1.